and welcome to Technical Drawing Solution by DN Kamau. Today I'm going to take you through isometric circles, isocircles, isometric circle by approximate construction method. So to draw an isometric circle, you will need a cuboid. And on this cuboid, we can see three rhombuses. There is this first rhombus, there is the top rhombus, and there is this side rhombus. We shall refer to these rhombuses as isometric squares in this case. So here we can see the separated isometric squares, which we shall call isosquares. So we can see that this is the top one, this is the right hand isosquare, and the left hand isosquare. There are two ways of constructing an ellipse or isometric circle inside a rhombus or isometric square. And one of the ways is the approximate method. This curve has been drawn using the approximate method, and that is the method that we are going to learn on how to do it. So looking here, we have this isometric square or the rhombus. We have another one here, and we have another one here. Inside is inscribed an isocircle. Looking at it properly, you would see that this is an ellipse. This is an ellipse drawn inside the isometric square. So this is 30 degrees, and as always, isometric objects will be placed at 30 degrees to the horizontal, so that each isometric part, whether it is the top part, the side, or the other side, it will always have 30 degrees from the horizontal. So these are the two methods of drawing isometric circles. There's this plotted curve, which we shall look at in another slide or during another lesson. And there is this one, which is the curve by approximate method. This is the one we are going to look at today. Draw this cylinder of 50 millimeters diameter and 80 millimeters height. We shall start with a cuboid. Always start anything that you want to draw in isometric. Always start with a cuboid. Then from that cuboid, you can get the shape that you want. So we shall start with cuboid, draw it in construction lines. Draw 80 millimeters by 50 by 50, and of course from the horizontal line we shall have 30 degrees on one side and 30 degrees on the other side. So let us take the top part. The top part is an isometric square, which is also 30 degrees by 30 degrees. And it is 50 millimeters by 50 millimeters, as we have seen on that previous diagram. So the first thing you do on that isometric square is to divide it into 4 quarters. And as you divide it into 4 quarters, you will notice that opposite angles are equal. And the opposite angles which are equal, one pair is a smaller angle than the other pair. So notice this larger angle, because we shall use it to draw our first curve. So after you have divided this into quarters, then you also need to do a diagonal from the smaller angle. So you can see that the diagonal is drawn from one small angle to the other smaller angle, so that the larger angles remain without a diagonal. So it is good to name those quarters so that as we draw, then we shall know exactly what we are talking about. So we have named these quarters 1, 2, 3, and 4. So after naming the quarters, then we identify the centers. We are going to use center 1 to draw an arc from start point C to end point C. So you will place your pair of compass on this center on the larger angle. Yes, on that center on the larger angle, stretch it to point C1 and draw an arc up to this end point there. Then next, you will place your pair of compass onto center 2 to also draw another arc on the opposite side. So here we can see that while placing a pair of compass here, stretch it to that point and draw that arc. Yeah. Then you can draw the radius here and the radius there. This radius will help you to get this intersection point between the radius and the diagonal. And this intersection point, this is the center that will allow you to draw an arc from here up to there. So notice that standing here, we have been able to draw this arc, and standing here as the center, we have been able to draw this other arc. And with our radius here, with our radius of this arc drawn, passing through there, and at the intersection point, we have our center 3, and we also have the radius here for this arc passing through there and intersecting with the diagonal at point 2. So standing at point 2, we can draw an arc from this point up to that point. and then with our center at point center 3, we can draw this this arc from here up to there. So the line is already complete. Standing here, you have stretched your pair of compass here and you draw this arc. Then standing here, you stretch your pair of compass here and draw that arc. And here we have completed the job, and therefore we have that isometric circle. So the next thing is to make it dark. But before we make it dark, remember we were drawing a cylinder, and therefore there is an extension of this cuboid downwards, like that. There is an extension, and therefore we shall move the centers. We shall move the centers, all the centers, because we have identified how many centers. One, this is the center to this arc. Then 2, this is the center to this arc. Then 3, this is the center to this arc. And then 4, this is the center to that arc. So all these centers will be transferred downwards, vertically downwards, 80 millimeters, since our cylinder is 80 millimeters, has a height of 80 millimeters. So we shall transfer all our centers 80 millimeters. So we are starting the transfer, and you can see that our center 1 has been transferred all the way here. This is 80 millimeters, and therefore our center, our new center, is at this point. Our new center is at that point, 80 millimeters from the position of our first center. Then we also transfer the beginning of the arc, because this center was used to draw the arc from here up to there. So we transfer the beginning of the arc also 80 millimeters, and the end of the arc also 80 millimeters. Yeah. So once we have done that, then you can stand with your pair of compass here, stretch it here, and draw that arc. So we have finished transferring center 1, beginning and end of arc 1. So let us do the same on the second one. The second one, we will also do the same thing, transfer the center, the beginning, and the end. So on this side also, notice that we had the center here and the beginning of the arc here and the end of it. So if we transfer this point 80 millimeters down, and then we transfer this one also, this point, end point, 80 millimeters down, and this point also 80 millimeters down, then standing at that point, we are able to draw this arc. So we shall transfer all the other centers, as can be seen here. Transfer all the other centers until you finish. So this center here, transfer this one 80 millimeters, transfer the beginning of the arc and the end of the arc also 80 millimeters, of which the end of the arc is already here, given by the end of the arc that we drew first. Yeah? End of it will be the beginning of that arc, and end of this one here will give us start and end of the arc here. So if we transfer this center point down 80 millimeters, standing at that point 80 millimeters, then we shall be able to draw that arc. Yes, and you can see that that point here is our center transferred down here, and then stretching your pair of compass there and drawing that arc. So we already have the two isometric circles on the top and at the bottom. So the next thing is for us to draw a tangent from this side of the arc to that point, yeah, and another tangent from this point here up to that point. So after drawing the tangents, remember everything is still in construction lines until now we are sure of what of the lines which will remain in finish lines and the ones that will remain in construction line. Until we are sure of that, all lines should remain in construction. So here we have drawn the two tangents, and this line behind the tangent, this line behind the tangent should remain in construction line. It should not be visible. All these other lines will be finished as shown. So you can see that this line now does not appear here because we have now outlined all the other lines apart from this one, which is now hidden behind the behind that cylinder. So having looked at the method of doing that, we can now apply it on such a diagram. And in such a diagram, you will first draw a cuboid, and you will also realize that this arc here is a quarter of the isometric circle, and therefore you will need 4 other quarters for you to be able to draw that isometric circle. This is also a quarter of an arc, and therefore for you to be able to draw this, you will need to have a full isometric square, a full isometric square, so that you know that there is this quarter, there is another quarter down here, and there is also another quarter down here. By drawing those, you will be able to know where you have the larger angle and the smaller angle, and it will give you an easy time on getting the centers, and therefore you can be able to get that. And for you to be able to draw, because these are two arcs, yeah, once you have gotten the center for drawing this one, yeah, and you have drawn it, then you can transfer that center 30 degrees this size, which is I think 10 millimeters. Yes, it is about 10 millimeters. So you transfer the center 10 millimeters and 30 degrees so that you get the second center, which will give you this second line. The same thing is applied here because this is a quarter. If it is a quarter, then there must be another quarter here. There must be another quarter here. And in total, we have 4 quarters. So if we have those four quarters, you can draw that using very light lines and be able to know where you have your wider angle and where you have your smaller angle, and therefore be able to get the center to this arc. And once you have drawn that arc, then you can transfer the center 10 millimeters, the beginning and the end, and you'll be able to get this second arc. Same thing to this. This is a quarter of an isometric circle, and therefore you can be able to get the other 3/4. Draw the isometric square and be able to identify the centers, which you can use to draw that arc. This is now a half an isometric circle, a half of an isometric circle. So that means you can draw an isometric square here. Generally, everything here, you start with a cuboid, a cuboid, and then you will cut out an isometric square, here, which is 30 millimeters by 60 by 30. That will be your isometric square, half of it, and then the other half is from here downwards, 30 millimeters, 60 millimeters by 30 millimeters, and therefore that will give you the full isometric square, of which now you can get the centers to these circles, and then transfer the centers 20 millimeters and be able to draw this other one. Same thing to this. This is also an isometric half circle, and therefore you can use isometric square here to identify the centers. Same thing here. This is a symmetric half circle, and therefore here you can draw a half isometric square, and then on this side the other half, and be able to get all your centers to give you that arc. So it's just a repetition here. Everything you start with a cuboid, and then you cut out those parts, you identify the isometric square, and get the centers, which will help you to draw the arcs. Same thing here. This is a quarter of an isometric circle. Therefore, you can be able to get the isometric square, from which you will be able to identify the centers and to draw those arcs. No difference here. Half isometric circle. Therefore, the same application will be done. This is a quarter. Yes, you can get this one independently, and then this is another quarter. Also get it independently, and use the same principles. Here we have this 20 millimeters. So there is an isometric square quarter here, isometric quarter here. You can get the other quarters to be able to give you the center. We also have this arc here, this one here. we would assume that it is the same as this one, so that would be 20, but here is a half of an isometric circle. So half of an isometric circle, you can easily get the isometric square here all the way like that, and be able to do that. So the only part where you are going to apply a isometric circle is this arc, this circle, or this corner, and that corner down here. Same thing is applied here. Identify all the arcs, identify all the curves, and on those curves, get the isometric squares, get their various isometric squares, and be able to identify the centers. Yeah, like this one has an isometric square. You just draw an isometric square here all the way down, isometric square, and from that isometric square you are able to get this circle and so on and so forth. Same thing to this one, you will just have to get the isometric square first for you to be able to get the centers. Well, there's no big difference here. Just identify the circles where they are positioned, and draw isometric squares, which will help you get the centers.